Hi, I'm Chef Michael Allemeier and welcome back to my kitchen. I've got another exciting recipe to share with you featuring one of my favorite ingredients of all time, Canadian canola oil. So let's start with this year, 2020. There's something 2020 has brought us, and that is the making of bread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of my favorite bread recipes. It's called focaccia. So focaccia is a little different than sourdough and some of those other breads that we're seeing. What I love about focaccia is how quick and easy and really satisfying it is to eat. So what I'm going to start with is I've got 325 grams or milliliters of warm water. Now this water is at about 24 degrees Celsius, and to that I'm going to sprinkle 12 grams of dry yeast, and then I've also got 20 grams of sugar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the warm water, the sugar, and the yeast together in the bowl here, in the mixer bowl. And what we want to do is, because the yeast is dry, we want it to activate. All right, so what we want to do, the yeast is dormant. As it hits that warm water environment, it's going to wake up and it's going to start doing what yeast does. And what yeast does is consumes sugar in whatever element it's in, and then creates carbon dioxide gas. And this gas is very, very important because that's what leavens bread, or that's what helps lighten it up. All right, so while that's just sitting there activating, let's talk about some of the other ingredients. So what I've got here is 500 grams of all-purpose flour. Now you can use bread flour for sure, but this recipe is really worked around all-purpose because I think that's something that every kitchen has. All right, and then what I've got here is 16 grams of salt. I'm using kosher salt. Salt is really, really important when you make bread because it contributes flavor, but it also helps with the gluten structure in the bread as well. And then I've got 20 grams of canola oil, and that is going to go in the dough. Now you probably notice that I'm using grams with my recipe, and as a master chef, one of my secrets to success is consistency in my food. And I find whenever I'm baking in the kitchen, whether it's sweet or making breads, I always use weights. All right, so I have this scale here, really awesome. I think scales are more and more accessible, and they're readily available, and they really don't cost a lot of money. So if you want to become a better baker, if you want your products to be more consistent in your baking components of your day, start scaling things, because here's the thing. 500 grams of flour will always be 500 grams of flour, versus if you use 3.5 cups of flour, that can fluctuate depending on moisture, compression. Is it at the bottom of the bag, the top of the bag? So for that reason, I'm a big fan of using a scale when I bake things, because it just makes things more accurate and it just makes things a lot more consistent. But let's get back to the bread. So the yeast over here, it's starting to activate, it's bubbling, it's doing its thing. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to add, let's just take the bowl off like this. I'm going to add the flour and the salt, and then I'm going to put it back on my mixer. And then you want to make sure that you use your dough hook attachment for this. So that goes on just like that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to start it off with low speed. So I always like to start it off very gently, and I want to just bring all the ingredients together. The warm water is starting to absorb in the flour, and then once the dough comes together, then what I'm going to do is increase the speed a little bit to medium, and in turn that's going to really develop the gluten. Now gluten is an element that is found in flour, and it's responsible for the structure and the texture of bread. So as this dough comes together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 20 grams of canola oil to this. So by adding a little bit of richness, a little bit of fat, a little bit of oil to this, what I'm actually creating is what's known as a rich dough. And rich doughs tend to be a lot more tender and, quite frankly, really delicious as a result. So this dough has come together very, very nicely. What I'm going to do is increase the speed to medium, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this mix now for about 8 minutes. All right, so 8 minutes has passed now, and wow, this looks awesome. So looking at the dough here, it is, look at that, it's so lovely. It is nice and smooth. It is nice and rich because we've got the canola oil in there. And what we need to do now is let it rest. So you can see the dough, it's nice and smooth, it's wonderful and warm. In a perfect world, you want to have your dough temperature around 24 degrees Celsius for this style of bread. And what we're going to do is I'm going to leave it in this bowl, and we want it to double. Remember the yeast that we put in there? It's going to feed on the sugar that we've added and the natural sugars in the flour, and it's going to consume those sugars, and it's going to create this gas, carbon dioxide, that's going to cause the dough to rise and get trapped in all the lovely gluten strands. So what I'm going to do is just cover it with a clean cloth. Now we're going to let this double. Okay, so about 20 minutes has passed now, and the dough is looking awesome. It's supple, it's really light, it's risen, it's doubled. Now, what I want to do is I want to punch it down. And punching down is important because that really helps create some texture in the bread and develops flavor as well. So a good little tip here is lightly flour your fingers. And what I like to do is I like to think of this as a compass. So we've got north, east, south, and west. So I'm going to grab the northern end and I'm going to bring it into the center, and then I'm going to grab the south and I'm going to fold that into the center. And if it's sticking to your fingers, just a little bit of flour on your hands is what you want, and that stops the sticking. And then the east, and then the west, and then basically just bring the dough up like this. Yeah, that looks awesome. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to let this double again, okay? And make sure you cover it. Okay, so about another 20 minutes has passed, and we can see the dough looks really good. It's really nice and light and fluffy, and it's risen really nicely. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the bread ready to bake off, basically. So what I've got here is 60 mils of canola oil, all right, or a quarter cup. And what I'm going to do is pour about a quarter of it into here. Now, the reason I love using canola oil for focaccia, first of all, focaccia is a rich dough. It is a rich bread. That's why it's so delicious. So I've got probably about a tablespoon worth of oil in there. And then what this is cornmeal or polenta meal. And what I'm going to do is just sprinkle a little bit on, and what this does is creates a little bit of an interesting texture in the bottom, but more importantly, it stops the bread from sticking to the bottom of my sheet tray here. So then with lightly floured hands, I'm going to carefully take the dough out. All right, and it's going to go into the pan. And now is the fun part. So with our fingers, I am going to literally spread the dough out. And it helps if your fingers are lightly oiled or lightly buttered, lightly floured, sorry. That's what I meant to say, lightly floured. And you can see the dough, this gorgeous focaccia dough, fits perfectly into my tray here, and simple matter of just pushing it into all the corners, just like this. Awesome. Now the remaining canola oil, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour it on top like this. Now, canola oil is very neutral in flavor. That's why it's so versatile for baking. It really makes all of your baked goods, whether they're muffins or cookies or cakes or bread in this case, it really takes them to the next level. It really, really does. Awesome. So that looks perfect. Now, traditionally, focaccia, you can cover it with some herbs. And what I've got here is some thyme from the garden, but you can use dried oregano, you can use fresh chopped rosemary. That works really well. I'm just going with the thyme leaves because that's what I've got right now. And it's fresh from the garden. And then I like a few little chili flakes as well. Nothing too crazy, but it just adds a little bit of fun to the palate when you eat it. And then finally, just a little bit of coarse sea salt. And there's something wonderful about the aromatic elements of the herbs, the richness from the canola oil, a little bit of heat from the chili. Now the trick is, what we want to do is we want to let this rise. All right, so that yeast once again is going to get to work. And when it rises kind of to the top of this tray, then it'll be ready to bake. And what I'm going to do now is turn my oven on, and I'm going to preheat my oven to 375. So this focaccia recipe is incredibly versatile. And what I love about this is the possibilities are literally endless as far as what you can do. I'm actually going to show you 3 different styles of focaccia. So we got the conventional one with the herbs. Now what I want to do is do one with mozzarella and with fresh tomatoes and with fresh garden oregano. So once again, we've got our recipe. It's been fermented, it's been punched down, it's on its second rise. And I'm going to put, this is my original 60 mils of canola oil, and what I'm going to do is, just as I did before, I'm going to line and brush the canola oil in the bottom, just like this, and then a little bit of cornmeal, and that once again just kind of helps, gives it a great little texture, and also just helps stop it from sticking as well. And then a little bit of flour on my hands. We're going to go and grab, this is the second batch of dough that I have fermented. And then, as I did with the last one, with lightly floured fingers, what we want to do is kind of push the dough out. So I always like to kind of start in the center and push out and kind of fill up all the corners. And the trick here is you want to make sure that the dough is even in its gauge. You don't want to have this side a little bit higher than this side. So it's just a simple matter of using the tips of your fingers, and you can see how rich and luscious this focaccia recipe is. And it's just gonna love the canola oil. It really, really takes to it because it just loves how neutral the flavor is and that fantastic richness which we get. All right, so that's looking fantastic. All right, and then the remaining canola goes over top, just like so. And then we're gonna brush it just like this. And what we wanna do is just really make sure that the canola oil is evenly brushed over top, and that is just going to add so much richness and a lovely, lovely element to this. And then what I've got here is, this is fresh oregano. I literally just picked it in my garden. Fresh basil works really, really well as well. And if you don't have any of the fresh herbs, even just a little simple dried oregano would work really, really well with this. And then what I've got here is some fresh mozzarella. So this is kind of like a pizza style mozzarella, something you might use for a tomato bocconcini salad. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place it on top. And I like putting the bocconcini down the center of the focaccia, just like this. Look at that. All right, and then down each side, some fresh tomatoes. Just lay them out evenly like this. Spread them out. What I've got here is actually 3 medium-sized tomatoes. And that looks like it's going to be just what I need. Look at that. That looks absolutely fantastic. And then just a little bit of salt. What I've got here, this is a coarse sea salt that works quite well. Kosher salt or pickling salt actually works very well. And same as the other bread, we're going to let this rise now. So it's on its final proof, and same measurement. What I'm looking for is the bread to kind of reach the top of this lip here. So this lip is about a ½ inch or about 1 centimeter. So when that's nice and full and rich, then it can go to the oven. Okay, so for my third focaccia, we're going to switch gears here a little bit, and we're going to do a bit more of a sweeter or a desserty style focaccia. Desserty, is that a word? Of course, we're going to say it's a word for sure. Now, this is a very traditional Tuscan style focaccia. This is something that traditionally was served to the vineyard workers as they were harvesting the grapes, getting ready for crush, which is happening this time of year. And this style of focaccia is also a celebration of these amazing grapes that we have in our markets right now. So these are Canadian Concord or Coronation grapes. Concord Coronation, they're a wonderful, wonderful grape. This grape actually has a double skin. So when you bite into it, there's another little baby grape kind of in the center of it. And it has really an amazing flavor. It's got a wonderful texture, and the flavor is absolutely so fantastic. So as we've done with the first two, I've added 1/4 of the 60 ml canola oil to it, and then I'm going to, with lightly floured hands, add the bread to it, and then with floured fingers, same thing, we're going to just kind of push the dough into all of the corners. So always starting in the center and working out towards the edges, just like this. I think this is probably one of my favorite parts. You get to kind of dimple the bread just like this. Awesome. Okay, so same recipe, 3 different styles of finishing it. Talk about versatility. Are you kidding? Love it. All right, and then the remaining canola goes on top just like that. Let's evenly brush it over top. Now, the beauty of putting a little bit of canola oil on top of the bread, it's going to allow it to rise so it doesn't develop a skin or get crusty. And then what I've got here is some pine nuts as well. And just a couple of tablespoons, nothing too crazy. We're going to spread those on top. And then I've got my grapes here. And this is probably, this is what, 2 cups or ½ liter of grapes. And then it's just a simple matter of putting these awesome grapes on top. And I think this is probably one of my favorite applications for coronation grapes. And like I said, traditionally this is from Tuscany. So picture it's grape season, huge wine region, of course, lots of activity happening in the vineyards. This would be a break. This would be a snack which the vineyard workers would have. They would this would be brought out kind of mid-afternoon when people needed just a little bit of a lift of the day. And what I'm going to do is just spread these grapes evenly over top of it. And then, as with the other styles of focaccia, we're going to let it rise. And it's just going to rise up to the lip and to the top of this. Okay, so about 20 minutes has passed since these focaccias were laid into their trays, and they look amazing. What we've got here is 3 different styles. So we've got our kind of our classic, our kind of old school, original style focaccia with fresh herbs, a little bit of chili flakes, some coarse sea salt on top of it, and of course lots of lovely, rich, neutral canola oil that really is going to make this one. And then we have, this one's actually a little bit more of a meal. Like, just think how perfect this would be for lunch. So we've got fresh mozzarella, garden ripe tomatoes, oregano from the garden, a little bit of coarse sea salt on top. And as you can see with both of these, the bread, the dough has risen to the top of the lip, just like this. And this is what we're looking for. And then over here, something a little unusual, kind of a nice sweet end, great for breakfast, great little snack, pine nuts and coronation grapes. And I have sprinkled a little bit of coarse sea salt on top. Not a lot, just a little bit, but sweet and salty really do work well together. So these are all ready for the oven, and the oven is set at 375. And what I'm going to do now is pop them into the oven, and we're going to let them bake probably for about 25 to 30 minutes. So all three of our focaccias are out of the oven. Now these took approximately 25, maybe 30 minutes to bake, depending on your oven. And how do you know they're done? They should sound a little hollow when you tap on them, and you can see how easily they lift up and out. Look at the bottom there. That is absolutely stunning. Of course, that's because we lined it with a little bit of canola oil and some cornmeal, and that kind of helped release that. So classical focaccia here, a little bit of fresh thyme, but you can use all sorts of herbs on there. Rosemary, oregano works really well. A few chili flakes, some coarse sea salt. And then this one's fun. This one's almost like a meal unto itself. Serve this with a little side salad and you're in business. I mean, we've got lovely fresh mozzarella, vine ripened tomatoes, garden, oregano, all on there. A meal unto itself. And then for a sweet tooth, we've got our pine nut and our grape bread here. What I sometimes like to do is just dust it with a little bit of icing sugar as well, and that just kind of really rounds it out a little bit more. A lovely little sweet treat to kind of just round everything out. Now, of course, none of this would be possible without our hardworking farmers. And Canada has over 43,000 working farm families that are responsible for putting food on our table. And I think of my friend Will in Manitoba, who's right in the middle of harvest right now. I think about how hard he's working right now. Literally, these guys are up first thing in the morning, and they will go deep into the night if the weather conditions are right, so that they can harvest and they can get off this bounty to keep Canadian tables full. And one of the biggest and one of the best Canadian crops that we can get, of course, is canola. So on behalf of myself to all of my hardworking farmer friends, thank you so much for all your hard work.